Did you think social media was toxic? Well, it's about to get so much worse because Meta, the company behind Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, is getting rid of fact checkers and recommending more political content. Great combo. So that uncle who got really weird after spending way too much time scrolling on Facebook during the lockdowns, his daily injection of pure black tar disinformation is about to get supercharged. But I also think it's really important to note that it's not just your uncle scrolling on these platforms getting radicalized. It's also politicians, policymakers, and decision makers who are having their brains cooked on Meta products and Twitter. Even when they aren't fully brain rotted, the less ethical among them see a path to power through the lies and fear that people have internalized on these platforms. So what is actually happening? Mark Zuckerberg put on his XXL t-shirt because, he's cool now, and went on to tell us some truly dystopian changes he's making to his platforms.
The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech.
He kicked off his announcement on Threads by saying it's time to get back to our roots around free expression and giving people a voice on our platforms. That's so funny because I thought his roots were like putting pictures of women from his university without their permission on a website and having people rank who they think is hotter. But I digress. Anyways, let's see how Zuck described it.
Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political.
So Zuck dives in with a doozy. He says they're replacing fact checkers with community notes, starting in the United States. Because he says, we've seen this approach work on X, prompting the former head of trust and safety at Twitter to weigh in and say he is, quote, genuinely baffled by the unempirical assertion that community notes works. Awesome.
After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US.
This next part is also really bad. Zuckerberg says Meta will simplify their content policies and, quote, remove restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are out of touch with the mainstream discourse.
We're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far.
So basically, if you thought the way people talked about immigration and LGBTQ folks on Facebook was bad before, it's about to get even worse. In fact, some of these policies have already gone live on Meta's website, which actually posted the edits that they made to their content policy, so at least they're being super transparent about being super terrible. So let's take a look at these changes, shall we? They explicitly say that they do allow allegations of mental illness or abnormality when based on gender or sexual orientation. This, they say, is because of the political and religious discourse around transgenderism and homosexuality. Yeah, that really makes it okay. They also now allow room for gender-exclusive language when discussing access to spaces often limited by sex or gender. So do you want to advocate for the exclusion of women from the military or trans folks from bathrooms? They allow room for that type of speech now. And in case that wasn't clear, they also say they allow content arguing for gender-based limitations of military, law enforcement, and teaching jobs. Oh, and if you want to say something homophobic about allowing gay people to access those jobs, you can do it as long as it's your religious belief. The last major content policy change I'll mention is they remove this opening line that acknowledges that hate speech online can promote violence offline. Gee, I wonder why Facebook might want people to forget that. The next part of Zuck's announcement is that they're bringing back civic content, which means you're going to be able to talk about politics, elections, and social issues again. That could have been a good thing, but when you couple it with the fact that they're getting rid of fact checkers and unleashing discussions on immigration and gender, it seems likely that we would see a lot more racist and anti-LGBTQ disinformation. But at least their no fact checkers will be working to keep communities friendly and positive. He then says they are moving their trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and their US content review is moving to Texas. Quote, this will help remove the concern that biased employees are overly censoring content. Yes, because Texas is notably more objective than California. But notice that he says concern of bias, not actual bias, which speaks to the fact that organized, highly vocal right-wing campaigns to scream about censorship win them the prize of tech giants becoming actually biased in their favor.
As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams.
In reality, a study published in Nature found that while pro-Trump and conservative voices do tend to get suspended on social media more frequently than their liberal counterparts, it's because they share way more links to low-quality news sites and have a higher estimated likelihood of being bots. As this professor said, if one team playing a sport fouls 4 times as much as the other, it's not biased for the ref to call more fouls against that team. But what would be biased is if all the refs were changed to be members of that team to avoid the perception that they were being biased. It's also worth noting that thanks to Texas's more restrictive laws on reproductive care and gender-affirming care, it's a riskier place for women and trans folks to work and live, which could arguably create the conditions for fewer women and LGBTQ folks to be working for Meta's US content moderation team. Finally, Zuck said,
"We're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more."
To me, that reads as if other countries actually want us to do more about hate and disinformation on our platforms, we're gonna go crying to daddy, and he'll punish you. Meanwhile, in case you had any lingering doubts about the direction that Meta is headed in, they just added the UFC head Dana White to their board. White, who was on stage with Donald Trump following his election victory, and who was described by CNN as playing a, quote, key role in his re-election, was once caught on video slapping his wife in the face at a party. But according to reporting from 404 Media, Meta employees who pointed this out and criticized White's appointment internally had posts deleted. What was that about free expression again? Anyways, at a time when Twitter is a great way to break your brain with regular exposure to lies and hate, and TikTok, the only platform where left-wing news influencers outpace those on the right, and where there are almost as many women news influencers as there are men, is facing a ban, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads are going all in on the Twitter approach to social media, which is to say they are once again taking an industrial-sized dump on our information ecosystem. Oh, and last I checked, they're still banning all news articles from being shared in Canada. So consider carefully where you choose to scroll and make sure you fact-check what you hear, because the broligarchs seem determined to break the world. But I'm a journalist who fact-checks and covers these kinds of issues. So follow and subscribe to push back on the brain rot. What do you think of all this?